Thanks for watching this portion of Garage Logic on our YouTube channel, and thanks to our friends at Everest Men's Health for supporting this. Go to everestmenshealth.com to see if their team can help you with stronger energy and better health. And catch the Garage Logic podcast wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts.
King, fireworks commissioner, and keeper of common sense, your mayor, Joe Souchere.
We're going to be joined by a fellow that I have not met, but I think we have a lot in common in our backgrounds growing up. His name is George Pett, and he contacted me as long ago as January and said, I'll read you exactly what his first one said. Are you possibly interested in archaeological mysteries similar to Josh Gates' Expedition Unknown or Curse of Oak Island? I have a mystery here in Minnesota. I've written a book on the search. It would make an interesting segment on the show. I grew up in the Crocus Hill area of St. Paul, and I'm sure we have many mutual acquaintances from the 50s, 60s, and 70s. I really think you'd get a kick out of this story. Going way back, my mom was friends with Susie Souchere back on Lincoln Avenue. Hope to hear back from you at your earliest convenience. Well, it's July, but we got to it.
Yeah, I was going to say, George, welcome to the club.
George, how are you?
Joe?
George, let's start at the beginning. What motivated? Well, first of all, tell us what you are doing.
Well, as I said in the email and in the Catholic Spirit article, I'm looking for that lost fort. It's spelled Beauharnois.
All right.
How do you pronounce that?
I have no idea.
Barharno.
It's
Barharno.
It's Fort Bournois.
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 So I'm driving down Highway 61 with the family to Lake City for a lunch overlooking the harbor there at Lake City at a nice restaurant. And I see a historical marker sign, and we pull in, and it tells about this lost French fort. And it said, it's a huge plaque. It said French trading posts on Lake Pepin, and it explains the whole thing. And very interesting. So 5, 6, 7 years later, I drive down the same road going to play the Jewel in Lake City this time. And they've changed the plaque. And now it just says Fort Bournois, on the shore of Lake Pepin, just north of here, a French expedition commanded by La Perrier and accompanied by 2 Jesuits in September 1727 built a substantial log fort and the mission of St. Michael the Archangel. The post was occupied periodically until about 1756. Mm-hmm. So they really condensed it down, secularized it, sanitized it, and but it piqued my curiosity, so I started looking into it, reading everything I possibly could, researching it on the internet at the library, and retired in 2018 and started going at it full time.
Literally in the field with equipment, right?
Well, I bought a metal detector because I had thought that, I really got into it when I bought the archaeological survey from the Minnesota Historical Society and the DNR. They did there in 1976, 20 people or so, archaeologists. They looked all over down there on Sandpoint, Frontenac, and they couldn't find anything French. 300-year-old evidence of the French. They found all sorts of interesting Mississippian cultures of arrowheads and spear points and all sorts of things, but nothing metal or from the French.
Why did the fort arrive in the first place? What compelled the development of the fort?
They wanted to develop trade with the Dakota, the Sioux, for the fur trade. Mm-hmm. It was huge back then, and the English were settling the East Coast by colonizing it with people. The French thought they could take Middle America for New France and just develop commercial relationships with all the tribes. Mm-hmm. And that's how they were going to control Middle America, New France.
And do you know with certainty that fort held what you believe to be the first Catholic church in Minnesota?
Well, that in numerous historians have said that.
Okay.
And so that's pretty well established that these two French or Jesuit priests, Father Michel Guinois and Father Nicholas de Gonor, and courageous guys to go all the way across Lake Michigan, down into Green Bay, down or up the Fox River, and then to Portage, 10-mile Portage to Portage, modern-day Portage, Wisconsin, then into the Wisconsin River, then down the Wisconsin into the Mississippi and turn north and head up and build a fort. They wanted one on the west side of the river, on the Minnesota side, to develop with the Sioux.
Tell us about some of the obstacles you encountered when you first started looking.
Well, I wanted to, with my metal detector, because I'd read this archaeological survey, and they said that they should have found all sorts of gun flints, flash pans, as you were discussing the other day, all sorts of forged iron left over, because they actually had a blacksmith, a forge with these soldiers. But they couldn't find any. I thought maybe a metal detector might find evidence of those things, because they were just using shovels, digging down 1.5 feet in a little hole. They call it shovel test pit. And they searched everywhere, but they couldn't find it. But they weren't able to look on the Villa Maria property that was owned by the Ursuline sisters. And that's right in the middle of Frontenac State Park. And some historians thought that the fort might have been on the nuns' property. So I call the state and say I want to use my metal detector and dig or go all around Frontenac State Park, and they said no.
Okay.
Can't. Of course. You can metal detect, but you can't dig.
All right.
So that doesn't do me any good. So I'm stymied. So now I do more research, and all of us, I decide to call the nuns in St. Louis and ask for permission on their property. And they said, sorry, we're right in the middle of selling this. Can't do it. We don't want to jeopardize anything. So now I'm stymied again. But then it turns out they sold it to a friend of mine from grade school and high school.
John Rupp.
Yeah. Called him. He said, sure, G-Tech, dig all you want.
Yeah.
So I started going at it.
And you're continuing to.
Yeah.
This isn't done yet.
No.
Because you haven't. What do you think is the closest thing you found that might be part of a church?
I have not found anything that indicates the church. The chapel was just a small little section of this 10,000 square foot fort, 100 by 100, and it was flooded the first spring. They got there near the fall of 1727. The next spring, the water came up 10, 12 feet and flooded them out. And so they had to move out, and a few months later they were able to move back in. All of a sudden, the warpath, the Fox Indians of Green Bay are back in the warpath. They flee. Half fled downstream to the Illinois River, and they were going to go over to Chicago and into Lake Michigan, but they were captured. Father Guinois was captured and held prisoner for 5-6 months.
Wow. Oh,
and somehow some of those 10 or 12 guys escaped, and somehow they were ransomed and finally released and got back to Montreal. The other half of the 15 guys or so stayed the winter, and then they fled the next spring or summer up the St. Croix into Lake Superior and across Superior to Michigan and on and up into Montreal. And then the Indians, the Sioux, burned the fort to the ground.
Do you feel like Indiana Jones when you're wandering around out there?
I do. I wear a hat just like this.
Yeah, I can picture it. Yeah. Did you get a gradiometer yet?
No, they're very expensive.
Yeah, how much?
Well, they're thousands of dollars, and but I'm going to try and rent one. I tried to rent one from California, and they wouldn't rent it to me because I was not urgent, and they were locked down. And but I found one here in over in Mequon, I think.
What is that instrument, and why do you need one?
Well, the metal detector only goes down a few feet. The gradiometer or magnetometer gradiometer, goes much deeper, and it looks for magnetic changes in the soil. So when they burned those log stockades, it burned down into the ground, and it shows. It'll show the magnetic change of those deep down in there, because over 300 years,
Well, you could find burned fort wall stumps, in other words,
Yes.
or sections of the burned fort walls if you had that equipment.
Right, and then you'd get in there with trowels and really do the archaeological digging the way they do it.
Are you
Is
working?
that the thing that also shows disturbed soil, so you can actually see where the soil has been disturbed and what hasn't been disturbed? Or am I thinking of a different device?
I think it shows all sorts of things underground, and you have to be quite an expert to read the results, which would be a problem for me if I rent one. But I don't know what else to do. There's all sorts of geophysical equipment that's very expensive, and but who
Right.
knows? Maybe I will.
Are you working by yourself?
Yes.
Are you on the site daily?
No, not daily.
Yeah.
Once every couple weeks, and it's. I find with the metal detector, I find 200-year-old nails.
Right.
And
Sure.
all sorts of chunks of iron that I don't know what it is, but it's, and then I'm finding chunks of ceramics, maybe fine china, and the most interesting thing I found was a piece of fool's gold, which I think maybe made my metal detector go off, but it was buried in one shovelful, 2 shovelfuls, along with a piece of a scraping tool that the Indians used to use, scrape deer hides with, real sharp thing, and then a piece of flake of what they call prairie de Chine chert, which is an arrowhead flake. And I showed it to some archaeologists, and they didn't care about any of the stuff I'd found except that flake of arrowhead that he thinks could be possibly 10,000 years old, and then he recommended that we declare the site a National Historic and get it registered as a National Historic, and John, of course, doesn't want anything to do with that.
No, and that would slow your process too.
Yeah, it sure would.
Is Rupp, does the high school still exist, or did that burn?
No, Central High School?
No, the Villa Maria.
Oh, no, the Villa Maria School, built in 1890 for $100,000, just a beautiful, huge 4-story structure with a 150-foot bell tower, and it was hit by lightning in 1969, burned to the ground.
Yeah, I remember that school.
Do you?
Yes. Do you? We're about the same age. You
Yes,
remember that existed?
I know. I never went down there. I never knew anybody that of the gals
So-
that went there.
What is in place of where that school was?
It's pretty much they bulldozed the remains into the basement and covered it up with dirt and sod, and then they built a conference center, a round limestone building that's modern, near the site of it was 100 feet wide and 300 feet long and 4 stories high. It was a huge thing. And then the nuns built in 1945 a new building, a convent that 100 rooms with the chapel and auditorium and all sorts of things. And that's the building that John's renovating.
It was a boarding school, was it not?
Yes.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
You've got everything working against you because I had solved your mystery for you before you got on.
Really?
And I was going to tell you to go to the building of the original building. You said that was late 1890s, right?
Yes.
And the first thing that occurred to me is he's got to find the spoils pile, the dirt and earth that they dug out and moved when they put that original building up. But it sounds like there is no chance of ever finding that. And now that I've heard that that got pushed into the basement and then everything got moved around, there's a potential that what you're looking for is more than 50 feet under the earth.
Well, they filled up the basement, and then they pushed the rest of it over the hillside down into the ravine of Wells Creek. And I walked through there. You can find all sorts of stuff just laying right on top of the ground, sticking out. But
Really?
that's all from as latest as 1890 when it was built, and up to 1967. So it's fairly modern stuff,
Right.
but very interesting. And she did. The Mother Superior had a display in the lobby of artifacts that she believes she found, French artifacts. But they were lost in the fire too.
Oh.
Why do you think this could be as significant as the fort in Mackinac? Is it Mackinac or Mackinac? I've never known.
I think Mackinac.
Yeah.
I went there on my honeymoon. I don't know. I think it's Minnesota's history. That's Michigan's history. We have our own, and it's the first Catholic chapel in Minnesota and altar but there's a lot more to this onion than just that. I mean, it's a historic area.
Yeah.
And but they came back 5 years later and rebuilt the fort 100 or 1,000 feet higher up on the hill.
Right.
And that's the second fort. Not sure the first fort will ever be found if it was flooded out, but. Then they lasted another couple years, and then the treaty fell apart, and they had to flee again. And then the Sioux asked them to come back 10 years later and for a third fort, and they did. And then that one only lasted 5 years, and then the French lost New France, Middle America, to the English, and they left.
Do you think the Archdiocese is interested?
Well, I mean, they wrote the Catholic Spirit article about it.
Yeah.
Did you see that article?
Yes,
Joe?
I did.
Yeah.
Yes.
I have it open right now.
Yeah. And
I have a question for you, George. So the school, was that built on the lowland where the fort originally flooded?
No, that's up on the hill with the highest point of the ridge.
Okay. So after that fort flooded down there on the lowland, was Phil ever moved in? Did they ever haul in or move in or scrape up dirt elsewhere and pour it on that area so it would never flood again? Did that ever happen?
No, that nobody knows. I talked to a guy at the Army Corps of Engineers. He said the flood water came up about 10, 12 feet. So I go to the Minnesota Topographical Map website, MNTOPO, and you see that it's 760 feet of elevation on the shore and about 770 feet of elevation where I'm digging on the lower part of Villa Maria property. I found an area filled with old nails, square nails, and all sorts of stuff. So I think possibly that could be the first fort. And then I walked off 1,000, because the history books say that they rebuilt it 1,000 feet up, 5 arpents, French term for 192 feet. So I walk it off, and it goes right up to the vineyards that the nuns had. And the soil is very clay, and it's not easy to dig. So I'm thinking magnetometer would work better than shovel test pits.
George, I got to tell you that you've already found more than these frauds on The Curse of Oak Island, which is this show Kenny watches, and he's enthralled by it, and he doesn't see that it's all a bit.
Joe, will you please shut
show.
your dirty mouth, Joe? Because George, I think those brothers, Marty and his brother, I think they could help you out
Yes,
here.
could.
They have the equipment that would help you find, like ground penetrating radar, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
If you could get them interested and get some of their equipment, I think that might be one of the answers you're looking for, because I think you're right. You've got to find out what's going on 5, 10, 20 feet under the topsoil.
Yeah, I think that's where over 300 years of erosion or whatever, it may be down fairly deep.
Yeah.
But that Gary Drayton from that Curse, I've been watching that show for 9 years. He's the only one that ever finds anything with his metal detector.
Oh, they found a Pepsi can, for God's sakes. They haven't done
Joe,
a thing.
again, dirty mouth,
All right,
zip it.
all right.
The only thing I have to say about Gary is I think that accent is fake. But his skills are real, and he gets the job done.
Right. And that Carmen leg up in Nova Scotia that they show everything to, I would like to show him and have him tell me all these things that I found, but that's quite a drive.
Any of the iron and steel that you found, is it just clumps, the unidentifiable clumps? Because I'm wondering if you're finding slag. Slag is a byproduct
there's
of
no
black.
slag. It's
okay.
It looks like it's maybe there was John Jacob Astor owned that area. In the early 1800s, he took over that whole fur trade.
Right.
And it's purportedly there's a John Jacob Astor fur trading post there somewhere in Frontenac area, and possibly I may have stumbled on that.
Mm-hmm. See, that's the portion of your story that I actually know something about, because you mentioned the river route from Green Bay to the Mississippi, and that was the modern day freeway back then.
Yes.
But it was during the Astor period where they were going back and forth from the Mackinac down to the Mississippi.
Right.
You find this fulfilling?
Well, in retirement, you have to have something to do, and I can only play so much golf.
What did you retire from?
I was 20 years loan officer at TCF, and 15 years as a stockbroker and insurance agent, and on and on.
You still live in St. Paul?
No, I live out in Minnetonka.
Oh,
not on the lake.
You've written about this, correct?
Yes. Well, in 2020, when COVID comes along, I can't do anything, can't go down there, and so I start writing my exploits, and it turns into a middle grade novel for like the Hardy Boys and Nancy Drew and all these adventure stories for kids.
Yeah, the Lost Fort Finders.
Yes.
Yeah.
George, it's so interesting what you've turned me on to, because myself, along with a lot of other Americans, think that Lewis and Clark were the big heroes. And they were, white man crossing the continent, finding a route, albeit not water, the whole way to the Pacific. But the French were on their way to the Pacific and looking for routes to the Pacific 100 years or more before Lewis and Clark.
Yes.
So it's very fascinating. Just the story of the fort alone and why it existed is fascinating.
Well, that Villa Maria property could have been the point, the tip of the spear of the French, because they were trying to establish relationships with the Dakota. There were 3 Dakotas: the Woods Sioux, the River Sioux, and the Prairie Sioux. And they were thinking that the Prairie Sioux might help them find the route to the Western Sea.
I have to ask you something delicate. You're aware of this horrific news that comes out of Canada, where graves have been found.
Yes.
And Does that ever cross your mind, or do you have no reason to believe that anything nefarious took place there?
I read something that it was just that the grave sites, the cemetery, and the names just disintegrated over the years or something, that it was just... But I haven't kept up on that story. But the sisters had their own cemetery there on the property, and then when they sold it, they moved them all down to Lake City Cemetery.
Okay.
And there are some interesting things on that property. The grotto, the replica of the Our Lady of Lourdes grotto that they built there, I think they built it maybe around 1900, 1910, 1920. I'm not sure.
Does it still exist?
Yes, it's a beautiful little shrine.
Wow.
But the interesting thing is that it's right next to, or possibly on top of, a mound that I discovered. There was a man named Newton Winchell who documented all the mounds in that area. There are hundreds of them down there in 1911, and even in the archaeological report, it said that we haven't been on the nuns' property, but there is a mound, and if it's still there, it's in such and such, and I found it.
Well, what do you think the mounds represented?
Well, it may have been the grave of a chief, somebody at that point. It's interesting that right across the river, directly east of Villa Maria, is Maiden Rock, where Chief Wabashaw's daughter or granddaughter jumped.
Yep. Yeah. I know Maiden Rock very well.
Right. Yeah. Maiden Rock, that's a story. So, I mean, the whole area is historic. And then the John Jacob Astor, when the French left in 1763, believe it or not, the English took it over, but the French somehow sloughed it to the Spanish. So the Spanish owned Middle America, Minnesota for until the Louisiana Purchase.
My word.
And then Zebulon Pike comes up there in 1805, Pike's Peak fame, and they're these French fur traders. They call them Cours de Bois. They were just independent, rogue fur traders. They built a fur trading area right there, and then Pike told them to get out and forced them out.
Isn't it amazing how property changed hands so many times? Meanwhile, the natives are going, wait, we have another great white god we need to bow down to? Wait a second. George, who was the guy you named in 1911? Because I lost the website now, but for a while there, is he the guy that took all the awesome photos?
No. His name was Newton Winchell. And I think, believe it or not, the name of his book was Aborigines of Minnesota. And it's all about all of the mounds that he's found down there. And I told Joe in my email that there's a slight connection to Ignatius Donnelly, who, former governor of Minnesota, former congressman, ran for president, I think, as a third party or something back in 1890 or so. His granddaughter was in my class in grade school along with John.
Are you a Luker?
No, I'm Linwood.
Linwood. I went to Linwood.
Did you really?
Well, for kindergarten. Then,
okay.
Then to Luke's.
Who was that, Miss Shea?
Well, hell, if I remember that,
That was
George,
her name.
God almighty.
Teacher Miss Shea for 1 year.
So have you been able to access any of Newton Winchell's writings or anything? There's got to be some answers in his stuff.
I got his book from the library, and I photocopied a page or two, and I put that together, and he drew a map of where the mound was on Villa Maria property, right on the cliff or on the hill above the creek. It's still there.
Let's get down to brass tacks, because Such is looking at me over his glasses. Give me a percentage, your confidence here. Are you 50% confident? Are you 90, 20? What's your confidence level here in finding something?
Of finding something, I'm 100%
proof, anything.
sure I'll find something, but whether it's ever the Fort Fort Bournois and the chapel, the mission of St. Michael the Archangel, I don't know, maybe 20. Well, they looked all over down there and couldn't find anything. Well, but as I said, they weren't using the modern equipment that we have now. And if I get my hands on that, I'll at least determine that there's nothing located on the 120 acres of the Villa Maria Hotel and Conference Center.
What would you have to find to demonstrate that you have, in fact, found the fort?
Well, it would have to be the log remains of that 100 feet by 100 feet,
Okay.
Palisade walls of that fort. I'm not sure. And plus, they had with the highest technological or historical or survey equipment from that period, telescope and sextants and all sorts of things. And they may have had to leave that behind when they flee in the middle of the night. So,
can you imagine finding that? Wow.
Yeah, that would be amazing.
And if you find the fort, which would be identified, correct me if I'm wrong, by the burned stumps, then you would be reasonably certain you have also found the location of the church because that was within the fort.
Yes.
Okay.
Exactly.
Because you can carbon date those logs, Joe.
Yes.
Joe.
Yeah.
Yep.
So what I think you need is you need Marty Lagina, you need Gary, and you need the guy that is responsible for everything on that show, Billy, the big dude in shorts that drives the backhoe.
Well, that's ironically, John is planning on digging out a trout pond down by this famous Wells Creek, right where I'm digging. When I found a midden, MIDDEN, which means kind of a dump of all sorts of things, or it was the burned remains of a fur trading post. And John's
be there.
Probably dig it all up and he wants to make a replica of Monet's famous pond, the Impressionist artist pond.
What does John foresee for the property? Is he creating some sort of tourist hotel destination? Oh, okay.
Yeah.
George, you need a backhoe. You need them to spread the spoils out, and then you need a wash table.
Well,
and you need me right there washing with you. We've got to find something.
I've got little wash tables. I made little archaeological screens, and I don't use the metal detector as much as I used to. Now I just shovel in there and shake it and find all sorts of stuff. But as I said, the most interesting things I found were up near the grotto and the mound, and because it's reputed to be, or when they built the fort, the Native Americans built, they call them cabins, 95 cabins or teepees or whatever you want to call it, around the
lodges,
outside of the fort.
Wow.
And this may have been somebody that lived in one of those teepees, buried it or hid it there. It wasn't down very deep.
Yeah.
And oddly enough, it was right next to the mound, and it's right next to the septic, huge drainage field from his septic system.
The spoils
hotel.
What happened to the spoils to that? Have you approached any native tribes? Do they have any oral history at all about this?
No, I have not. And that's the interesting thing is that there were roughly 6 of these French forts. There's one at Trempealeau, Mount Trempealeau in La Crosse. There's one in Wabasha. There's one right across the river from Villa Maria, Stockholm, Wisconsin. That was the one where Fort Saint Antoine, he declared the whole Middle America, this area, as part of New France in 1689. The guy's name was Perrault. And then there was another, they're all over. There's one on the Minnesota River near Mankato, I think, and there's one on Prairie Island.
Oh, yeah.
Sure, yep.
And they've come close to, but then that one on Prairie Island, that tribe, the Shakopee, I think, Treasure Island Sioux, I don't think they're wild about it, but I'm not sure.
Did you know the Grady Twins?
I sure did.
Yeah, okay.
Jeez, Joe.
Give me a time.
I did the eulogy for Tommy
Oh, yeah?
Grady
Yeah.
at the University Club.
Oh, boy.
And somebody came up to me afterwards and said, "What do you think? You're taking over for Joe Souchere or something?"
Yeah.
Listen, this
You know who that
GL
was,
thing.
Joe, that said that?
Who?
It was Mark Snow.
Oh, yeah? I grew up next to the Grady's.
Did you really?
Yeah, on Linwood. Yeah.
Oh,
George,
I remember
here's
the
the
house.
fact.
Yeah.
Here's the deal, George. This GL thing is about to crash and burn any day now, and as soon as that happens, you've got a new best friend. You are not.
I'd love
You are
to
not
have
going to
you.
be able to shake me. I'll bring. Oh, this is
Say
so
the word
exciting to
when
me.
you want to go down there. I'll meet you down there and I'll show you around and you can do whatever you want. Dig.
Oh,
dissect,
careful, careful,
help
George.
me.
Well, George,
I'm not looking for treasure. I'm just looking for history.
Yes,
History to me
that's
and
right.
evidence
Well, I
of
mean,
history.
I'm not sure there's any treasure there, but they
No,
are reputed to have fled in the middle of the night. And what do with their hundreds and hundreds of beaver skins?
right.
They left them behind. They supposedly buried them in caves, or
Yeah.
hid them in caves.
Well, they wouldn't have stood the test of time, though.
No, those would be in rough shape.
So what's next to get the proper equipment down there?
Yeah, I think the next thing I'm going to do is probably get rent a magnetometer for $50 a day and see what I can find.
Well, Kenny's serious in
Yeah,
his offer.
I'd
I know
love to
that.
have him help me. It'd be great.
Yeah.
Yeah, we need some experts to help us
And
out here.
I'm rushing to do shovel test pits on this area that John's going to dig up with the big backhoe. And
Oh, that's what I was going to say. You have to be there for every
Yeah.
single second of
Right.
that.
Right.
Yeah, you cannot miss one scoop there.
Yeah.
That's very important.
What if you see the burned logs?
well, then I'll have to tell John to hold up here a second.
Yeah.
Yeah, just give me a couple of days, get some samples, get them tested, so we know what era they came from.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow,
George,
so
this is
fascinating.
Reavers. The only thing I really want to contribute is it was glad to see that nice write up in the Catholic Spirit
Wasn't
because
that
the
great?
last time that the Catholic Spirit came up on their show, Joe and Pat were getting ripped a couple of weeks back, and I think that they.
No, George. Does George know that story?
I don't know.
Pat was very concerned about the time of game at a funeral he had to attend, and he was also doubly worried that the Archbishop was going to be there because of the prominence of the priest who was being celebrated. And so Royce was terribly fretting about how long this might take because it was very hot. And he reported to us on Monday Night Sports Talk with glee, I might add. He reported with glee that got her done in about an hour 10 because the Arch is a big fella. I think I could beat him in a foot race. And so the next thing you know, Archbishop Hebda's writing an article in the Catholic Spirit suggesting that he never thought he would come to fame on Monday Night Sports Talk, and then doubly was uncertain he would ever come to such fame because of his weight. And I had to say, Arch, it wasn't me. That was Pat. That was not me.
Yeah. Way to blame shift.
Yeah.
George, we got to keep the Historical Society out of there, too. I love these guys, but they're going to slow down your progress.
Yeah, they're changing there. I think Catherine Kirsten wrote an article about the changing there.
Yeah.
That they want.
I mean,
they
I
changed
love
the
them.
name of Lake Calhoun, and they're talking about changing the name of Fort Snelling now.
Oh, hell, they get
Yeah.
in there, they turn it into an LGBTQ memorial.
Well, I'm just worried because, like you said earlier, they're going to put a stop to all the digging and slow everything down.
Yeah.
And this is privately owned now,
Yeah.
so we
Right.
got to keep them out of the mix.
Right.
And then
They told me
later,
that an archaeologist from the Minnesota Department of Archaeology said, "Be sure not to dig on that mound or anywhere near it," and which I wouldn't. But
No, of
it's on
course not.
private property, and but still,
Yeah. Well,
But with
because again,
mounds-
the mound is thought to be a burial site.
yes.
Yeah.
right?
But it's
And George, isn't
interesting that the nuns put their grotto right on top of it,
Yeah.
yeah.
and the mound may have been built on top of the remains of the forts, because that's a prime spot for the fort too. So
Oh. So I'm wrong in assuming mounds, burial mounds, we're talking thousands of years old. I thought they were way back.
No, I think they can certainly be thousands of years old, but they can be fairly recent. And
Oh,
a lot of them
fascinating.
have been, they call them pot hunters, have ruined them.
Yeah.
Will you promise to keep us in the loop?
Yes. And I appreciate your offer of help, Kenny.
Oh, George, I've got 1 foot out the door with this this operation here. I would love to join you.
Yes, I'd be glad to have help. The gal that wrote the article for Catholic Spirit, her husband has a metal detector. They want to come down and look around.
Yeah.
Well, I hope you can retain your proprietary claim.
I think so. I'm
Yeah.
pretty, fairly close with John, so
Yeah.
he.
Well, wonderful. It's a great story. I want to know.
is.
We'll want to know more as this plays out.
I will keep
is.
you abreast.
In
And
fact-
it's been a real honor being on your show.
Well, thank you. But in fact, I think we should talk to you as soon as you might discover anything with the new equipment you're going to be renting.
Yes, I'd be glad to.
Feel free
and
to
when he
email
digs
me.
up that trout pond, when he digs up that trout pond, send us an email. I want to know what you find there.
Yes, definitely.
All right.
All right. Thank you, George.
You're welcome.
George Pett in search of the first Catholic church in the
Thank
state
you.
of Minnesota. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe.
Yeah.
Seriously, that was a lot of fun.
Wasn't that
I
fun?
really enjoyed that. Yeah.